got me interested in this topic was that as a high school student, I've been involved in many activities over the course of my past 4 years, ranging from sports to clubs, etc., outside of school and in school. However, there are often times where I felt overwhelmed or have been tugged in many directions to fulfill my commitments to my extracurricular activities as well as maintain my academic standing. Thus, I was interested to see if other students felt similarly and maybe potential solutions as to how we could address this issue. So to begin, let's define some key terms. Extracurricular activities, or ECAs as I will refer to for the majority of this presentation, are defined as to the extent at which an adolescent is involved in activities that occur outside or parallel traditional school curriculums, according to parents et al. Next, procrastination. Procrastination is the act of delaying or postponing something. And finally, mental health. Mental health is the condition of being sound mentally and emotionally that is characterized by an absence of mental illness and inadequate adjustment, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. So, why should adolescents even participate in ECAs at all? First off, it can limit recreational screen time among adolescents, according to Orville et al. However, this does not bar clubs or extracurricular activities that are focused on coding, which may utilize the necessity of a screen. This is more specifically aimed at minimizing aimless scrolling on social media platforms and at spending hours on end on mentally destimulating video games. 2, it can improve mental health. In a study published by the NIH, conducted by Bolines et al., indications of a positive impact on mental health outcomes were found for participation in team sports, in school clubs, and in extracurricular and community sport and non-sport activities. Finally, it can develop one's experience profile. In today's day and age, students are finding competitive methods to stand out amongst colleges and in workforce opportunities. Getting involved is often the most common way to become well-rounded and stand out. To that end, on average, adolescents will participate in at least 2 to 3 ECAs and spend about 5 hours per week on them. This is according to Carol Church, a writer from the University of Florida who was reviewed by Drs. Terry, Rantanovich, and Smith from the Department of Family and Youth Community Science in the University of Florida. Much of my background research related ECAs to yield a positive mental health result in terms of overall well-being. However, another factor I looked into was also procrastination, which is often associated with poor mental health. Several studies have linked procrastinations to depression and anxiety and low self-esteem, according to an article by the McLean Hospital. This leads to my gap. While existing literature highlights the positive impacts of ECA involvement on mental health, it neglects time management and motivation necessary for students to engage in these activities. Thus, knowing that ECAs have a positive mental impact, but procrastination has a negative mental impact, and knowing that procrastination is harmful to the completion of schoolwork, these 3 topics intertwine to give my research question, which is as follows. To what extent do extracurricular activities reflect positively on adolescents, and at what point may it harm academic performance? To explore this question, I use a developmental-based research and a survey-based approach in order to characterize my data in a quantitative and qualitative manner while gathering data from an experiment that I designed myself. My experiment was going to put participants through conditions of having undergone an ECA and then complete an academic responsibility. So for my experiment, there were 2 components that students or participants who were students had to undergo. They faced an ECA simulator, which was a cognitively challenging yet stimulating activity, which had some sort of interest to them, as many students are engaged in ECAs that tailor to their liking or their hobbies or an interest in mind. Second, I chose an academic stimulus, which would mimic schoolwork and provide students with an example of what their homework might look like following an ECA. To that end, my ECA stimulus that I chose was a Sudoku puzzle, and then for an academic stimulus, I chose SAT questions, which had 30 total, 15 from reading, writing, and 15 from math to simulate the multitude of subjects we face in school every day. So my methodology was, once I had participants who completed a consent form and agreed to engage in my experiment, they they conducted this experiment on their own time under my constraints. So first, they had a pre-survey to gauge their extracurricular activities and commitments. Second, they were given 2 Sudoku puzzles, which would divide their attention between the academic aspect and then the extracurricular aspect, where they were given 2 puzzles and each were given a 10-minute time to take the puzzle. 20 minutes tops. It doesn't matter. It did not matter if the students completed the puzzle or not. They just had to undergo this activity in that time span. Next, they took the academic stimulus, which consisted of 30 SAT level questions, and they were not given a time constraint for this, so they could take as much or as little time as they liked. Finally, there was a post-survey to reflect on their experiences. My hypothesis was that students would go about these tasks normally, failing to see the strain they endure. Once given the opportunity to reflect using the post-survey, they would realize how taxing the balance can be. The time pressure would cause students to utilize more brain power, which would cause them to be tired when completing homework assignments. Thus, students may experience procrastination and would delay them in completing the more cognitively stimulating tasks following being drained from the ECA. My goal was to have 15 to 20 participants, and I was lucky enough to get 16. First, they had to fulfill the consent form requirement, which was to ensure that this experiment was conducted ethically. Students had to confirm their interest, and then a parent signature was also gathered to acknowledge their participation. Next, a pre-survey was used to gauge students' basic thoughts and feelings on this topic. It incorporated how many hours they spent on extracurricular activities, how well it was going balancing both extracurriculars and their academics, how they think they perform on academics, and how they perform on their extracurricular activities. The question was asked both in the front and back manner, asking how extracurricular activities affected academics, and then the flip version to ensure that both sides were covered and students had an opportunity to think about how one affects the other. I did not plan to collect any of the answers from the experiment itself. For instance, I would not have known how much time or how much of the Sudoku was completed within the 20-minute time given, or how many of the answers were correct in their academic stimulus. However, the post-survey did gauge students' reactions and responses to having gone this experiment. So it asked how they felt about following the Sudoku, how they felt after doing the worksheets following the Sudoku, how they felt having to balance both, and again, the idea of the front and the back version with the flip of the question of how one affects the other. It also asked them how they liked working like this in general overall, and whether they felt there should be more accommodations or support with balancing the two from outside sources. In terms of question formulation, being a student myself, I could not ask students about mental health, and so I had to keep this in a more positive light and keep students more on a high, thus leading to questions being formatted in a manner of asking how well something is going. For example, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, how well is it going having to balance extracurricular activities and academic assignments? For the results, as I mentioned earlier, I got 16 participants to respond to my surveys and take these tasks, and overall, they had pretty across the board commitment times, with the minimum being 4 hours per week and the max being 36. Many students indicated that they normally spend about 15 to 20 hours per week during extracurricular activities, and then that allowed me to have a good assortment of individuals who can provide a variety of perspectives based on their different levels of commitments. So first off, the first question was, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, how well is it going to having to balance extracurricular activities and academic assignments? As seen by this chart, 25% of students ranked it a 7, 18% ranked it at 8, 18% ranked it at 10, 12.5% ranked it at 3, and a ranking of 4, 5, 6, and 9 each got 6.3%, which was one person out of the 16. As you can see, this is generally pretty positive, with only 2 numbers being below a 5, which I used as my median point, where they didn't have much of an opinion, and the higher end being a good scale, more positively succeed. The next question was how well do you think you perform in your assignments while participating in ECAs? And a majority felt that they could perform at an 8 or a ranking of an 8, with 31.3% saying that, 5 out of the 16 individuals. 3 out of the 16 individuals ranked at a 9, and 3 out of the 16 ranked at a 10, thus having a majority of 11 individuals stating that they felt that they could do well on both assignments and extracurricular activities, ranking at an 8 or higher. And on the flip side, we have extracurriculars while balancing schoolwork. Again, it was a ranking of about, with the majority of an 8 or greater, or 7 or greater, which generally remained pretty positive, with 31.3 saying 8, 18.8 saying 7, 18.8 saying 10, and 12.5 saying 9. Some student perceptions that I got on the open-ended questions were that students did not comment, or they felt that they found it particularly difficult to balance those particularly academic heavy weeks and extracurricular activities, and then students who enjoyed their extracurricular activities and could balance them well. And then students who felt they learned time management from having to do this balance. This was, again, a pre-survey, so this was their perception before undergoing my experiment. Following my experiment, as you can see here, students had a very mixed reaction to the whole experiment. It was largely 50-50, with some students saying they felt good, some students saying that they felt a little exhausted or mentally drained following that, which correlated with their academic worksheet question of, did you find it easy to do the academic worksheets following Sudoku? About 50% said yes and 50% said no. So in terms of the post-survey results, on a scale of 1 to 10 being the best, how well was it having to balance extracurricular, Sudoku, and the academic assignments? Majority said ranked at a 7 with 25%, and then 18.8% was a 6, 18.8% was an 8. Again, generally still pretty high, however, lower than the initial pre-survey, indicating that students are feeling the strain that was initially discussed, or what I set out to see. And then the other question was how well you think you performed on the academic worksheet. Again, 25% ranked it a 5 or a 7, and then 12% ranked it a 4, 6, or a 9 each. So more towards the middle of the scale again, so portraying the fact that there is a subconscious training or taxing effect on students that students really didn't realize until being asked to reflect upon their work ethics or their work style. In terms of the long-term implications, a lot of students said they felt that this was not a great working environment, as they felt they were not great at multitasking. Some found the transition between ECAs and then engaging in their academic stimulus to be challenging. And then when asked whether they would continue working like this in the long term, most of the students said it would probably be very tiring or, quote, overload their brain. Accommodations. When asked if students believe there should be accommodations, some students believe there should not be, as students understand the commitments they sign up for, and others believe that teachers should be more understanding of ECA commitments and provide some accommodations to students who conduct or engage in ECAs to help, as they only do so to help their future. So in conclusion, ECAs have a direct effect on academic performance and their perception of performance. I believe that schools should recognize the importance of ECAs and coordinate with teachers on making that transition or that unison between the two more seamless, and check in with students more often. Parents should also check in with students and work with school and ECA communities to ensure students aren't feeling too overwhelmed. Some limitations of my study was the inability to discuss mental health. As I mentioned earlier, being a student, I did not have the qualifications necessary to ask students if they felt stressed about certain aspects or not. Additionally, the chosen stimulus of Sudoku was based off of my own perceptions. That's something I found interesting that I thought other students might. So that is a biased age factor to gauge from. And then the SAT level academic stimulus is also something that I thought of myself. So that's also another limitation. I also had a limited number of participants for the study at 16, all from this high school, and all ranging from 9th to 12th graders. So it's also a limitation. For future studies, I think that scientists should focus on the stress and mental health factors, and they should identify the points at which procrastination is cultivated to further this research and kind of get to the root cause of the strains caused by ECAs and academic performance. Thank you.
What was the most important source of information you found while conducting your research for your background and understanding of the topic, and why was it important to your research process?
The most important source I found was a source by the NIH, which looked at adolescents, mainly 14 to 18-year-olds who had done extracurriculars before the pandemic, and then they were looked at afterwards, and just the difference in the mental health range, and just the way in which that students perceived their mental health, and then their overall happiness and and their satisfaction with their lives was important, which helped me kind of tailor my study towards something like that.
Thank you.
If you had a time to do additional background research, which lens or perspective would you least focus on, and why?
Could you repeat the last part, please? Focus on?
Sure. If you had more time to do additional background research, which lens or perspective, would you focus on?
Okay, thank you. I would focus on the procrastination aspect as which triggers or which aspects would kind of promote procrastination in students, and then kind of ask questions tailored to those points.
All right. How has your views changed about the nature of your inquiry as you completed the research process? Are you still interested in this topic?
The nature of my research has changed in the sense that I think a lot of students aren't aware of the strain that they put themselves under. I think taking the time for students to reflect upon this experiment has allowed them to see, which is why we saw that slight drop in ranking. So I think that's an important factor. I am still interested in this research. As I said, I would like to go into more of the procrastination aspect in the future.
Any other questions from the audience? Anyone?
What do you feel the best number of PCAs per student? What would you recommend for them to be engaged and for it to become a positive experience versus being too many and being a negative experience?
I would say that that's up to personal preference because different ECAs demand a different amount of time, and then it also depends on the kind of academic rigor a student is engaging in. So it's really, it's not a one-size-fits-all plan for everyone, so it's really up to the individual to figure that out.
Any questions at all? No? All right, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.